I think I took that with me, from an early age, beyond just the academic, concept of doing well in school to like pursuing things in my career and in my personal life. So like, of course, like I said, it's not just about hustling and working hard, but doing so with intentionality. And, if you're going to apply yourself and go above and beyond, like do it for something that really counts or really matters to you.
So, but yeah, I know I'm excited to see what we get into, what we talk about. So if you want to introduce yourself and kind of tell us who you are, and we'll preface the conversation with that and go from there.
Sure. Thanks, Cody, for the introduction. And I'm so glad we're speaking. My name is Karen Ayoub, and I am the coach and founder of From Seed to Bloom Coaching, where I help high achieving early career corporate professionals who are ready for their next role, but feel held back by self doubt so that they can actually achieve their next role. So, in today's job market and climate, there can be a sense of desperation to get a job, a first job out of college, or even any job if you've been having a career break. And then once you've gotten that role and settled in, there can be this sense of, wait, maybe I should have thought a little bit more about where I want to be, or finding this sense of misalignment or dissatisfaction, even. I don't want to make light of how hard it is to land a job right now, and that sometimes a job is just needed to pay the bills. But I am trying to express that the rose colored glasses of having a new job will eventually come off when you're maybe 6 months in, or 9 months in, maybe even a year in. And then there can even be this sense of burnout or imposter syndrome of, do I even belong here? And that's where I come in as a coach. So I help these professionals overcome feelings of imposter syndrome or the trap of selling themselves short. So that way they can confidently articulate their value and move from their current job to a promotion or their next role. And in addition to my work as a career coach, I'm also a biomedical engineer by background, and I've worked at a public medical device company since 2018, where I still work today. I have experience in some different areas, including operations, R&D, and now I currently work in project management. Aside from that, I also have my MBA and a professional coaching certificate from Case Western University. And I have this pretty well-rounded perspective given my career in engineering, project management, having the MBA, and I feel that I can share that with clients and bring them value. Being familiar with the corporate world, I've also been involved in recruiting and holding leadership positions in employer resource groups. Overall, as a coach, I feel so fulfilled when I see individuals reaching their dreams.
All right, so there, man, there's a lot there. You got a lot going on. Uh, I want to talk. You said I just made a quick note about this biomedical and engineering. Was it
Yeah.
something?
So my major in college was biomedical engineering. I
Okay.
knew from the time of, I want to say from high school, I wanted to do engineering. My father is also an engineer by training. So yeah, I was interested in that. And then specifically biomedical. I can show you actually something cool that I worked on for everyone who's on video. So this is a knee implant. So if you need to get a knee replacement, this would be something that, you would go into surgery and then a metal implant would be put in. So that was really like one thing I was so passionate about and why I studied biomedical engineering.
Hmm. That is so crazy. I've never met somebody who's actually like. So you help. You work on designing these things.
Right. Yeah, that was my previous role being in R&D, research and development, designing and working on testing for that specific implant. My current role actually is more on the software side, so software in healthcare. So I don't work directly on devices anymore, but I'm proud that I did get to in the past.
Yeah, that's actually really amazing. I've never met somebody who's actually done that. Um,
Thank
well, I
you.
guess maybe we'll get back to that before we close. But so you were talking about coaching, and one thing that really stood out to me was the word alignment. And so I don't think that's something that gets enough attention because I think there are a lot of people who are working extremely hard in almost the exact opposite direction of what is aligned to them, if that makes sense. I mean, like there's so many people who, and I don't mean just having a job who this like difficult or, whatever, but there's a lot of people who like it's not even that they hate their job so much as it is that their job is the exact opposite of who they are almost. You know what I mean? And so it's I guess it's a heavy way to say it, but it's almost seems like it's a luxury to be aligned with your work, you know, in today's society and culture. So with alignment, what do you I guess maybe what do you see as like common issues that people are not aligned? Is it financially motivated? Is it, some other motivation of why they're pushing something that's maybe not aligned for them, or maybe they just don't know, to look for these things?
Right. Yeah. I think all those kind of questions are valid. I would say some of the most common things I see as far as misalignment or sources of misalignment is one, the team culture. So maybe it's their manager or even like an extended team. Again, thinking about my context being in corporate, it could be, within your immediate team, maybe adjacent teams, or even like leadership above your direct supervisor's level. And if the culture doesn't align with what's important to you and your values, that can be that first sense of like dissatisfaction. And that's one big thing where maybe we can say it's outside of the person's control for the most part. Yes, an individual can try to be a change agent, but usually a culture in corporate is pretty ingrained and like kind of baked in. And I would say that even within a specific company, like I work for a very large company and I've been on four different teams now. And the culture that I've experienced in each one is pretty different. And there were ones that were more aligned to me and what I believe is like, these are my values and this is the way that work should be done and the way that I like to receive feedback, etc. That's one big bucket, the culture piece. And then the second big source of misalignment that I see, which I would say maybe the individual has a little bit more control over responding to, is a misalignment in job responsibilities. So maybe it's the person's what they're tasked with on a day-to-day basis that feels like really exhausting for them. And it's not just because the person doesn't want to work hard, but there are different skill sets that people use. And if someone is drawing from their strengths and they're feeling energized and they're doing that work, then that's great because they're probably going to be motivated. Even if there's a lot on their plate, if they're doing something that they really, really enjoy, or they feel that they're using their strengths, then they will be excited to show up every day. But then when the work starts to deviate from the strengths and it's more of just busy work or things that really don't match what the person is interested in, eventually over time there can be that misalignment because then you're just trudging through trying to get things done. It's a lot more about task completion versus learning and enjoying the work.
Yeah, man, that's such a good point. And I know that you probably know this or you've probably heard of this, but like when people talk about burnout, first of all, I didn't know until, later last year that burnout was like a clinical, that's like a diagnosis somebody could have like with burnout. But I think there's several forms. And one of that is, I don't know the technical term for it, but it's like the person is not doing something that's fulfilling enough or they're not getting enough return on investment on their efforts. And it kind of sounds like it's going kind of in with what you're saying here as far as responsibilities. I mean, it's easy to think about whether it, like, if it's too demanding, it's easy to think about that being overwhelming. But it's also if it's not aligned with something that you feel like is maybe a higher purpose for you, or if you're not working towards something that you think is a big enough, like, I don't know, goal or like whatever. I think those are things that we don't really think about. Like when we think about burnout and misalignment, it's usually just like the overwhelming instead of the underwhelming part.
Yeah, for sure. And when you were talking about the sense of purpose and how that contributes to alignment, I kind of want to double click there because that's something that I really focus on as a coach, where it's important to first understand what is your purpose, what is your calling. And I'll help clients do this by going through some exercises where I would give them maybe a list of values and then they have to pick out of this list of 50. And it's not my exercise, it's one that many have used. I think Brene Brown maybe is the one who like authored it, but you would pick from a list of 50 values, your top 10, and then narrow that down to your top five. And then other types of exercises where it's you're imagining your life in the year 2036 or any year like 7, 10 years from now, and then thinking about what is it that you're doing, and not just about work but holistically, what are you doing, who's there in your life, what are you excited about, are you even working, and if you work, what type of work do you do, what do you do outside of work, things like that. So kind of having these ideas of like dreaming and visioning, maybe it sounds like really grand and may not be tied to the day-to-day work of an actual person's job, you know, today, Friday, January 9th. But, it's really important to make that link because if you don't have a sense of purpose or direction, if you don't have that North Star, it's going to be hard to figure out, okay, is this job or is where I'm at in life really aligned or not? And then having that is a sense of motivation as well, because once I work with a client to establish that vision, that like big sky, blue sky idea of where they want to go, then we'll create an action plan of individual steps working toward that goal. But again, if
Hmm.
you don't have anything that you're moving towards, or if the target is always moving, then how can a person stay motivated to reach their goals?
Yeah, no, for sure. And we So talking about purpose, this is something that can't really be discussed enough because you a lot of times if you talk to someone who is struggling with an addiction or something like that, a lot of those things happen, or at least it starts, or what helps it start is a lack of purpose. And on the other end of that, a lot of people who I've talked to who have come out of those situations, they did so. One of the big ways was like attaching themselves or involving themselves to something bigger than them, to a bigger purpose. Whether that's in a lot of those spaces, those people who overcome addiction is community, a sense of community. People who are in the same, like helping people who are in that spot. And so, I mean, I think that we talk about a lot of, or I talk about, on and off of here, men's issues, and because that's my experience, that's been my experience in life. And so I try to talking to these younger men, I think that's one thing that's they're missing. These guys in their early 20s, mid 20s, is that sense of purpose, that sense of higher calling, like something bigger than themselves. And so I mean, we can go down this rabbit hole of like how it affects your mental health. And it's basically like if you're not working towards a purpose, you're I heard it put one time, it's kind of a heavy way to say it, but it's if you don't have if you're not working towards a purpose, you're essentially slowly, it's like a very, very slow death. And I guess you could think about it that way, with the mental health and the toll that it takes on you mentally and emotionally. I'm sure that is true to some extent. But yeah, I don't think purpose is something that can be discussed enough, for sure. And I'm glad to hear that you have a framework on how to help these people, I guess maybe discover what their purpose is.
Yeah, thank you. The framework, I didn't mention the name of it, but this was something I was exposed to in the coaching certificate, the training that I received, and the theory is called the theory of intentional change. And again, this framework is really focused on finding positive motivators for change. So it starts with the idea of something we call the ideal self, which is about the
Mm.
values and vision for your life and your future, which I kind of talked about a few minutes ago. And it would include your career, aspirations, how you operate, as well as personal life as well. And from that point, the framework of the theory of intentional change will move from the ideal self to the real self. So if ideal self is where you want to be, real self is here, where you are today. And then eventually we'll talk about closing the gap between those two things. And again, the idea is to have this very like positive sense of motivation. As a career coach, I am focused on the tactical skills. So we'll talk about things like applying for jobs, networking, updating resume and LinkedIn and personal branding. Like all of that is very tactical, but it's not just about the task execution. It's also about having the vision. It's being strategic. The client will be strategic through the guidance they get with my coaching to do all these steps in service of their vision and long-term goals versus just to execute tasks.
Yeah. So I want to kind of double click on something you said also. You mentioned closing the gap, and you said between the ideal self and what was the ideal self and
The real self. So
the real
who you
self.
are
Okay.
today. Yep. And real self would be things like your strengths and weaknesses. Another example of something that really feeds into that topic of real self is feedback that you get from others. So, of course, you can reflect on your own strengths and weaknesses. You can think about times you failed and things that you're good at and all of that. But getting feedback from others is what really takes, your development to the next level because there
Mm.
can be so many blind spots that a person has. And it can be scary to get feedback. And I was just thinking about this earlier in the week and had actually written a post earlier today on LinkedIn about the idea of 360-degree feedback. And that's something that I highly recommend and have coached people on actually when they get that 360-degree feedback. And for anyone not familiar with it, this is what it looks like. So you would have a set of questions. Typically an assessment is online, so it's like already written. It's not like you're making up the questions may be on different topics, and what I'm familiar with is more on the emotional intelligence and social aspects of how you come across. And then the person taking the assessment would essentially fill out the assessment reading themselves, but then also send it to other raters. And the questions are around topics like adaptability, achievement orientation, emotional self awareness, self control, things like that. And then the people who fill out the survey are doing so anonymously. And then the person who's getting feedback would probably want to solicit responses from a wide range of people. So again, thinking about my own experience, I've gone through a couple of 360-degree feedback surveys. I've done it twice. And when I did that, I asked people, so I asked my husband, I asked friends, coworkers, peers at work, supervisor, my past supervisor, and my current supervisor, family members. So again, getting that wide array of feedback. And it is going to be anonymous. So there's a sense of like, oh, I don't know what to expect. And then the actual output of that 360-degree feedback is a combination of some quantitative questions. So, questions where a person is being rated on a scale from 1 to 5, as well as some open-ended questions where the person is just, the rater is giving their comments. And again, anonymously. So people don't really hold back. And that was my experience. So, in getting that feedback for myself when I was going through my training and did the survey, some of it was like a little tough just to digest everything.
Right.
But I think once I got through that initial sense of like surprise or shock, even denial, maybe some of those stages, and then I eventually got into the meat of the feedback, there were some really great tidbits there and some themes I was able to draw out through the help of a coach that was actually coaching me. And from there, I worked on a few of those areas and I'm continuing to work. Of course, all the soft skills and emotional intelligence, it's not something you check the box on. It's something you have to keep working on day in and day out. But there were a few clear areas I knew that I needed to work on based on feedback from others. And like I mentioned, I've also coached other individuals on their 360-degree feedback reports. So again, working with them to understand what are the trends in the data, what patterns do you see, and what strengths and weaknesses are being called out by the people around you. And are there inconsistencies? Like maybe if there's one rater where, it seems like one category like is a lot lower or a lot higher than the rest or the average, we'll like take note of that. There's a little part of me that's very like analytics and data focused. I actually did a math minor, so that I think that comes to me a little bit naturally, making sense of the data, but then also making sense of the open-ended comments, the qualitative feedback that people that I was coaching were receiving. And again, helping them lay out an action plan, picking not everything, but maybe just one or two themes to really work on, and making sure that those things are going to really move the needle and again, be in service of the person's goals when I'm coaching them.
So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that is really important. You mentioned the feedback, and I think you mentioned that when you were going through maybe this assessment, you were asking for feedback from people around you, and it's anonymous. So of course, people don't hold back.
Yeah.
But that's interesting though, because it's like we think we're aware of our strengths and weaknesses, but maybe one of those weaknesses is thinking we have a strength we don't have. And so I think a good way to find that out is to ask those people that know you the best. So you were talking about this ideal self and this real self and sort of closing the gap between the two. And I know we talked about a good bit of it here, but like, what do you think, like closing the gap, what does that look like? We have this assessment, we have, finding out what the strengths and weaknesses are, but like, what do you think, other than maybe just the awareness of that, what do you think are common things that are holding people back from closing that gap between who they want to be and who they currently are?
I think what holds people back a lot is mindsets. There are a few mindsets that I've seen a lot when talking to individuals. The first of them is the victim mindset. So it gets often contrasted with an agent mindset, where a victim mindset is like things are happening to me or I'm subject to these influences outside of my control. And there is the reality of, yes, there are things we cannot control. And, if you ever see those graphics, there's like the circle of what you can control, which is kind of small, and then the circle of what you cannot control is much bigger. But there is still an opportunity to take action. And I think when people who suffer from the victim mindset, like if they really ruminate and they're kind of feeling stuck in this, they may not act. Or there's even the like analysis paralysis of thinking all the things that they could do. And, I've seen people say things like, oh, you can spend 1,000 hours thinking about what you can do and making all these grand plans. But like none of that actually matters as compared to like doing something for an hour, like actually taking action, even though it's scary. That's one mindset. And then the other big mindset that I see, and this is something that I really focus on in my coaching and I specialize in, is imposter syndrome. So feeling this, again, the sense of being stuck, not so much because of feeling like a victim, but because of this feeling of like, oh, what if I don't belong here? What if I don't deserve this? And allowing self-doubt to creep in. And with imposter syndrome, a lot of the time the person doesn't even have an accurate self-concept. They think much lower or much less of themselves than what is actually true. They have successes, they have a proven track record of things that are going well for them, but they see those those events or those successes as a fluke, or they don't see them as attributed to their skills. They see it maybe based on luck. And because of that, if they don't challenge the imposter syndrome, they also hold themselves back from achieving for more. And that's something that I struggled with at points in my career. Like, I see myself as a high achiever, no doubt, and I'm always thinking about the next thing. But there have been times where I would also hold myself back because I worried what other people would say about me, or I wondered if, again, if I deserved the success that I was having. And if it's left unchecked, it can be really dangerous. And that's where, with imposter syndrome specifically, having a mentor or a coach or even both can be really helpful, because you need someone to be a mirror to you, in a sense of not repeating those negative thoughts, but being a mirror and holding it up to you and say, like, look, like, these are these things that you're successful. Here are your strengths. Here's what other people are saying about you that they really see in you or they find you inspiring, etc. And then kind of giving that gentle dose of reality to the person, because I think the people we surround ourselves with also contribute a lot to self-confidence. If you have a circle of people that are maybe jealous of you or trying to put themselves above you, then that can fuel imposter syndrome. Even if you have a manager who is not supportive, or someone who's always thinking, like, or always communicating that what you do is never enough, then again, that can communicate imposter syndrome. That can induce feelings of imposter syndrome in a person. Or maybe the person keeps overperforming and feeling that they're not being noticed or rewarded for that, especially in the workplace. And all of that is kind of a negative cycle. But on the flip side, if a person surrounds themselves with what I'd like to call a board of directors, so people who are really invested in that person's growth, and they're not just going to be cheerleaders, but they're also not going to be naysayers. It's something kind of in between, where it's like there's the accountability and there's the encouragement in a gentle way. And if you have people in your circle, that will definitely help with really refining, like, what voices or what inputs are you hearing that really shape your self-concept.
Yeah, man. Okay, so there's a couple things I want to say about that, because there's a lot of stuff there. I mean, the imposter syndrome, it's almost like you have to have that to some degree to really achieve something this great, because it's almost like you have to have a delusional self-belief about yourself, about what you can do and what you can achieve. And it's like anytime we start anything, before we start it, we probably haven't done it. So we have to have that almost delusional self-belief in ourselves. And one thing that I say about that is, like, when people feel imposter syndrome, I understand it's a negative, like, feeling, but all it is it's showing you that you're not that person yet. Like, you're not who, we talked about the ideal self and the real self. You're not the ideal self yet, is the way I see it. That's the way I see imposter syndrome. And then you were talking about the victim mentality. And I don't know how much you get into, spirituality or manifestation or anything like that, but it's like that. I think that's a really good example of how we create the reality that we live in through our minds, because the victim mentality, for the most part, mostly probably, it doesn't really exist. Like, whatever the story the person is telling themselves is not really real, but it makes it real, because it's like, first of all, it puts the power of the change into the hands of somebody or something else versus in that person. So that's one thing. And then it's like, it anybody with that sort of philosophy or that approach, they it's almost like it's repulsive to a lot of people. Like, people don't really want to get involved in that, so it pushes people away, it isolates those people who have that mentality. And so it's like it almost makes itself real through that belief, and it's just a perpetuating thing. And it's I don't know. I think the victim mentality is right up there with the limiting self beliefs that we have about ourselves. I mean, it's so dangerous, and I understand that there's, not everybody has the same starting point, and there's, unfairness. I get all that. That's a real thing. But I just think we need to be careful with putting the power of that change in the hands of someone else.
For sure. I agree with you completely. And I think that, like, for people who experience victim mentality, if they are truly a victim of, some type of abuse or other more serious thing, I'm not trying to make light of that.
Right.
And that is very much separate from, what I'm talking about. I'm
Right.
talking about more of, people who have that safety. They're not undergoing things like abuse, but still they feel maybe stuck in their lives, or they feel especially stuck in their careers. And there's the metaphor of like the golden handcuffs, where maybe you're at a job that's like stable or it pays well, but you feel so stuck there. You feel like, oh, it's really, again, just not aligned. And it can be scary to take a risk. And that's where, again, I come in as a coach and help the person to explore, like, okay, if they are going to make a change or move, they know that they need to like leave behind where they are. Like, okay, what are they actually going towards?
Mhm.
To be running away from something is not motivation enough. You need to be running towards something else. And it's
Yep.
okay if you have a little bit of both. Like if you're transitioning jobs, or if you're moving from working corporate to having your own business and you're leaving your 9 to 5, like that's okay. But again, it cannot be just running away from something.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a quote that I don't know if it was Tony Robbins or who. Somebody said that I'm gonna like probably butcher this quote, but it's people will fight to avoid a loss more than they will fight to gain an equivalent gain, if that makes sense. So like if you have let's just say a certain number of clients or whatever, like people will fight harder to keep that number of clients versus attain the same number of clients, if that makes sense. Which kind of like your example is the running away from versus running towards. Um, and again, that this all breaks down into intrinsic, extrinsic motivation, which is not, which one's sustainable, which one we can do over the long term. But I think when you're running towards that thing, I think that you will be able to, I'm not going to say it's easier, but it'll be much more probable that you'll achieve that thing, because if you're running from a thing, then what if it's not chasing you? Does that mean you stop running? Versus if you're running towards it, does that mean you just continue to go? I don't know. I don't know if you know who Eric Thomas is. He's a motivational speaker. So he tells a story about the lion and the gazelle, how the gazelle is running from something, the lion's running towards something. But it's just it's a different way to, we're talking about mindset earlier. It's a different way to phrase it, and sort of structure it in your mind. But yeah, I don't know. I think running from the thing is probably not sustainable, and running towards it is not only sustainable, but it's fulfilling, you know?
Exactly. I agree. No notes.
Yeah. Um, I don't know, man. It's, but going back to this alignment thing, cause I've been thinking about this a lot, for myself and just for the world in general. And it's like, I don't know that I mean, this is one of those things where like I don't think there's like a black or white answer. I mean, there's a lot of gray involved in it, and I don't think even alignment I don't think it has to be work for everybody. Like when we say alignment, it's not like we're saying like, I don't think every single person is going to be motivated to be aligned in their career. I think there's going to be other areas in their life where their alignment is going to fit better. Like, some people are very career oriented, which is fun. Some people are very family oriented, which is also fun. Some people are very, hobby oriented, whatever it is. But it's like, it's not going to be a career is not going to be the answer for everybody. I mean, some people, as long as they have a job that they're okay with, that pays well, whatever, they're fine, which is okay. But that is what's aligned with them. You see what I'm saying? So that's where the alignment comes in. So I don't want people to think that when we're talking about this, that we think that you have to, get a career that's all about passion and zero work and all that kind of stuff. Like that's not what we're really saying. We're saying about being aligned with whatever that happens to look for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that there's often a big emphasis on career because, of course, when you're working, like that's the main source of income, and then also the activity you spend most of your waking hours doing. Like maybe a third of our lives we spend at work, whether that's
Mm,
in an office, working for somebody else, or even working for yourself. You spend a lot of time doing that, maybe even more than a third for some folks. So that's why I think it gets to be so important. But I do agree with you that there are things outside of work that are important to consider. And even again, with my focus on career coaching, it's not just about, okay, getting the job or being successful in your job, but how does the career fit into the rest of your life? And if you get a promotion or if you get this new job, what does it enable for you? Not just the paycheck and the salary, but what does it enable for you holistically? Is that, more time back in your day? Is that feeling like less stress and not bringing residual stress into your outside of work relationships, things like that. And when you were speaking even about, alignment in other areas, like kind of more personal versus professional, it made me think of something that, again, back to my training, something that I learned about. So the idea of the values. So I mentioned this exercise where you have a long list of values and you have to narrow it down to 10 and then further, into your top 5 ranking. There's an example that's often talked about where maybe one person has a value of family, and the way that they actually like see that through, or they realize that value may not be the same as another person. So for, we can say person A, for them, family is super important. So they're going to work really hard, taking extra shifts or working hard to get a promotion. So that way they can take home a bigger paycheck to provide for their family, to enable their family to go on nice vacations or do things that cost money. Versus person B, who also has the value of family. Person B is going to say, when it hits 5 o'clock, I'm leaving, or I'm going to make sure I'm present for a dinner with my family, for my kids' recital or sports game or whatever it is. So again, both people have the value of family, but the execution or what it actually looks like is different. And
Mhm.
people can share what their values are, but it's like once you get to really like get to know them, then you can hear more about what does that alignment look like, and what, how do they make decisions, because it's both the values and the orientation of like basically your mode of operating. Those two
Mhm.
things together, coming together, are what help you realize, okay, this is what I want to do, this is who I want to be, this is what alignment looks like. If we take person B back, it's that example of coming back to person B. If you tell person B, oh, you care so much about family, why don't you work harder so you can get that promotion? They're going to be like, that's not the kind of, person I want to be, father,
Mhm.
mother, spouse, sister, etc.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the big things is like there's you mentioned supposed to be like we see what we think are blueprints of people who are like have done things that we want to do for ourselves, and you hear the quotes like the average millionaire wakes up at 5 a.m. or whatever and this kind of stuff. Um, First of all, you have to ask yourself if that's even what you want to be, because being a millionaire is not. I'm sure it's not easy. First of all, it's not easy to get there. It's not easy to stay there. They say it's a lot harder to stay versus get. But but when a person is like, let's use the 5 a.m. example, because I think waking up early is a big one for a lot of people. We do that in the name of productivity, but a lot of people like that is not a good fit for them to be up that early. I'm one of those people. Like I can't be up at 5 a.m. If I'm up at 5 a.m., like I'm not getting anything done at 5 a.m.
Yeah,
Even if I
same
do
here.
like a jump start on my day or whatever, like I'd much rather like work, at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, another hour or so, versus wake up that extra hour or two. You know what I mean? But anyway, it's just like these things, when we say alignment, this is kind of like all the things that we're talking about. Um, and the irony of it is, if a person, like if they have that, like you said, that 5 o'clock cutoff to spend time with their family, more than likely they're going to be recharged for the next day to be even more productive. So like that's the ironic part. Like it's not like you have to like if somebody else is working 12 hours a day and you're working the 8 or whatever, is if you're recharged every time that 8 hour window is reset for the next day, but that 12-hour person, like they're just, like we talked about earlier, burned out. Like I mean, you're gonna get way more done anyways. So it's kind of ironic when you think about it.
Yeah, yeah. I think you bring up a good point too about like the recharging and like energy management in general. That's something that I really feel passionate about in my own personal life, but then also I make it a point to discuss in coaching that yes, you can be pursuing your goals, you can be working and doing all these great things, but if you're always hustling and never taking a step back to recharge and renew yourself, you're going to be, running on empty, and eventually you can't anymore. You're not going to be bringing your best self. Maybe this comes up again in the topic of imposter syndrome. Maybe if someone is so burnt out and so exhausted, now they're going to show up at work and they're going to make a mistake on something like a document or just a mistake in general, and then they're going to be like, "Oh, I made a mistake. I must be a failure." And now it's because of the burnout and the lack of focus, it leads to a mistake. Then the mistake fuels this sense of a false self narrative,
Mhm.
and then that false self narrative, if you keep thinking and ruminating on that, that fuels even more burnout. So now you're stuck in this cycle. So really breaking the cycle and taking a step back and thinking, okay, what are my renewal or energy management practices is an important question. And there's kind of 4 quadrants or 4 areas to think about. There's physical, so what are you doing for your body to recharge? Emotional, what are you doing for your heart, what, your emotions? Mental, intellectual, recharging, things that are stimulating you, but again, giving you an opportunity to step back. And lastly, spiritual. And even if you don't have a religion, the spiritual aspect, is still very important. And making sure you give equal weight to practices in all four of these quadrants really matters. So, an example for emotional could be something very simple. It doesn't mean that you have to like meet up with a friend or have these like long phone calls to recharge you, because like that's fun, but it also can take a lot of time. But maybe it's something like, okay, when you're at home, you set your phone to do not disturb and you have, quiet hours to just kind of take that step back. Maybe if you're thinking about, the mental or the intellectual type of recharging, there's an opportunity to like listen to a podcast or an audiobook that you really enjoy. Personally, I love listening to audiobooks while I'm working out, so I feel like I'm kind of hitting two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
But really, it's fun for me because like I really care about fitness, and making sure I work out is important for my own health, even my mental health, just to take that step away from the home, but then also to listen to something that's ultimately fun and not necessarily like related to self improvement or career, because I have a lot of those things I listen to or I consume anyway, but just having something that's fun and keeps me engaged is a good way to again to have that self renewal.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so important, man. And I don't think it's talked about enough because I think especially in the self-improvement world, like we've almost we've almost become like guilty almost for or we feel guilty for taking that time off or taking that break or whatever. Um but like you mentioned with the burnout, if you don't take a break, your body will choose when you're just going to take it for you. Because it's, I don't I've told the story before. So I have a landscaping company, and I feel like, over the course of building this thing, at least like two or three times, I've experienced burnout just because we were trying to do so much at one time. And then I had the podcast, and I have another business that I in, and so it's like all these different things, man. And it's like there were times where I thought the answer was just to work more or work harder. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was just actually taking steps backwards versus forward. Um, and so anyway, but yeah, when you give yourself that break and you give yourself that sort of chance to recharge, I think it is, I don't think it's something that's talked about enough. You mentioned the gym, listening to audiobooks. That's crazy because I listen to, when I'm in the gym, there's several different things I listen to. I hardly ever listen to music. I don't really listen to music in the gym, but I may listen to like a podcast where it has maybe like a motivational theme, or a motivational video on YouTube or something educational, something along those lines. Because I feel like what I'm doing there is working on myself mentally at the same time I am physically. You know, I feel like it's so because I've loved fitness myself too. I'm big in fitness, but it's I feel like when you're in there, it's a good way to sort of, I mean, I guess it would be recharging. It's more like releasing like pressure and tension and that kind of thing. But I don't know. I think working on yourself mentally and physically at the same time is really empowering. Um, and that's not. I think that's again one of the benefits of working out. It's not so talked about enough. But yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of different directions we could go with this. But before we do close this, I do want to go back to the biomedical engineering stuff because I am so like, there's a lot of talk of health on this podcast and fitness. Um, that implant that you have, that thing sounded pretty heavy. It was like a clunk when it hit the table
Oh,
or the desk right there.
yeah, it is heavy. That the implants, like the one I showed, is like they have different sizes. That just how happens to be the largest size. But yeah, it's pretty cool in the sense of if someone needs a knee replacement, they'll be able to get both the type of implant and the size that they really need.
So like what's in I don't know if you can talk about this kind of thing or not. If you can't, we'll just go to something else. But what's like the most interesting thing you've worked on as far as like an implant or like a, because that thing looks like metal. It looks like steel.
It is. Yeah, so most implants that go in the body, like knee and hip implants, are either cobalt chrome or titanium. Those are the metals that would be like biocompatible.
Okay.
Yeah, and as far as your question, I think one of the most interesting things I got to do, or like things that I was really most excited about, even like as I look back, is seeing the clinical application of what I've worked on. So, I actually got to go to the operating room and observe some like actual cases, like an operation on a real
Mm.
patient, receiving a knee or a hip implant. And it was something that I just, it was like a really big privilege for me because I can spend like hours and days looking at a computer screen of a design or writing a test report or, making a PowerPoint that looks pretty to talk about, again, everything with this device. But like being in the operating room, seeing it live, like seeing, the implant come out of the package and eventually be put into the body to help a patient's life, like that was what felt like really fulfilling to me.
Yeah, I bet. So was this like in your experience, was it like just joints and tendons? Or was there like because isn't there like artificial like pacemakers and stuff that go in hearts and stuff?
Yeah, yeah. So my area of focus in the previous role, like I mentioned, was knee implants, and then
Okay.
what I work on now is like a digital product, so software, not something that goes into the body. Yes, there are other devices, like you said, like pacemakers. It's just not something that I've gotten the opportunity to work on.
Okay. Yeah, it's such an interesting field, man, because I know that I think there's I don't know even what the phrase is, but for if someone has like diabetes, I think there's like a patch that goes on their arm. And I think
Yep.
there's a way to connect it to your phone and you can tell like what your levels are. I mean, it's amazing the steps that we've had, I think, in medicine. I think we're still slacking in a lot of areas in medicine, but I think at least in those areas it seems like there's been a lot of like steps, progressive steps.
Yeah, yeah, medical, like, technology or, like, med tech for sure is an exciting space to be in. That was one of the reasons why I went for biomedical engineering, and it's always evolving. There's so many things going on in the industry that I'm excited about.
So, I'm just curious about this. When you go, like, you have this education, biomedical engineering, are you like you're learning like how the body actually moves, like the tendons and the muscles and the joints and that kind of thing?
Yep, yeah, yeah, so because it was an engineering degree, there was, like, a great deal of physics, but it was kind of like
Mm.
the application of physics to the human body. So you gave the example of a joint. So, okay, you think about, what would happen to a joint, like a joint in the physics sense of the word, right? There's, like, different loads being applied, there's a moment arm, inertia, like, all of those ideas, like, all of those, concepts and calculations, just applying that to the body. So, like, the shoulder joint or the hip joint.
Interesting. Yeah, man, that's so interesting. I've never. I mean, I've heard of like implants. I've heard of like the the pacemakers, the screws in the leg or whatever it is. But like you never think about, or at least I haven't really thought about the science behind it that goes into it. Um, anyway, that's just interesting. Uh, Before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't touch on that maybe you wanted to? Any areas we didn't get to?
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit more just about, the coaching approach I have and maybe sharing a couple of stories too, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, if anyone was to, be a client of mine, again, my coaching practice is called From Seed to Bloom. I guess I can take a step back and also talk about the name too, since people have asked me that before. So again, the name is From Seed to Bloom. So the idea is planting a small seed, investing in yourself and in your development with time, with care and nurturing. You'll eventually see this bloom or this growth into whatever it is that your goal is. So with that in mind, what the program looks like is first there's this idea of visioning. So again, kind of like we talked about with the ideal self of like, what is your goal? What is your sense of purpose? What do you want to accomplish and why? What are your values? And then from there, moving into self-assessment. So like we talked about also the strengths and weaknesses, getting feedback from others, really thinking about where you are today and any of those gaps that we see that need to be closed. And then from there, we develop an action plan. And again, with the mindset or the focus on career coaching, the action plan would either be focused on helping a person get a promotion within their company or making a pivot to like a new job or a new company and even a new industry. So we're putting that action plan together. And from there, working on these very tactical things. So networking, interviewing skills, optimizing LinkedIn profile and resume. And then from there, once the person actually has the plan and begins to put it into practice, eventually they will land the role. And I coach the person. It's not a fixed number of sessions, but I coach the person. I work with them until they get to that role. And then once they get there, the closeout looks like establishing a 30 and 60, 90-day plan for that person's success in their promotion or new role. And that's kind of the process. I can always get into the nuts and bolts if anyone has questions, but that's my approach, and I am very passionate about it. I have been able to help people. So, I'll give one example. So there was an entry level engineer that I helped. I coached her for several months, and she came to this point in time where she was dissatisfied in her role. She was a designer for a specific, med tech company, and she felt pretty misaligned in the sense of she was really passionate about innovation, but her role was a lot more about just like execution, hitting numbers, very metrics driven. And eventually she felt, okay, I don't want to stay here long term. She saw other people on her team who had been on the team for years, and she was like, that's not the path for me. And she wasn't sure exactly where she wanted to go from there, but again, she was really passionate about innovation and making her own designs. So she approached me, and then we worked out a plan together. So I helped her think about, okay, who are people that you can network with? If you see a job posting, like how to approach it. You're not going to just like ask someone like, hey, can I get this job or recommend me? Like there's a strategy behind it. So I worked with that person to identify some of these different areas of interest, how to actually go about these networking conversations to first learn about different teams that are recruiting. And then once that was kind of narrowed down, she actually applied to a job, and I also supported her through the interview process, and she ultimately landed that job. And that was a couple years ago, and she has told me ever since that she's very fulfilled and feels like the new job that I helped her get is more aligned to her skill set, her passion, and even like what's really important to her with long-term growth in her career.
Yeah. No, that's amazing, man. I think it's amazing that like hearing that a person found what was they thought was aligning, aligned to them. Um yeah, no, that's amazing. I appreciate you sharing that. So if somebody wants to reach out to you, do you have a Facebook, do you have a website or anything?
Yeah, yeah. If someone would like to get in touch with me and see more of my content and what I talk about, I would recommend my LinkedIn. So we can make sure that's linked in the show notes. But I'm on LinkedIn. My name is Karen Ayoub. That's spelled Karen. Last name Ayoub. And I post daily content on career development, overcoming imposter syndrome, building self confidence. And also, when you connect with me on LinkedIn, you can send me a message or a note that just says the word podcast, or you can say pure wisdom. That way, when you do reach out, I'll know that you've come from listening to this. But yeah, definitely looking forward to anyone reaching out, and happy to chat if there's anything that resonated with you, or anything that you want to talk about, explore career wise. Let's talk. Again, my name is Karen Ayoub. You can find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah, no, perfect. Thank you. So one thing that I ask everybody before we close, and it's just kind of just keeping with the theme of wisdom. Uh, if you could share one of the most important lessons you've ever learned, it can be from your personal life if you're comfortable sharing it, or your career, your coaching, your coaching business. What do you think is one of the most important, most valuable lessons you've ever learned?
Um, I would say the most important lesson is like, for me, it was always just like achievement and like pushing the boundary of what's possible. Growing up, I had my family was very much like encouraging me to like go above and beyond. And part of it was, because I'm the child of immigrants, there's like this sense of like, all right, we came here to this country and we want you to be successful, and that was a big part of my upbringing. But, my parents really, really believed in me. It would encourage me to push myself, to excel, to go above and beyond. And I think I took that with me, from an early age, beyond just the academic, concept of doing well in school to like pursuing things in my career and in my personal life. So like, of course, like I said, it's not just about hustling and working hard, but doing so with intentionality. And, if you're going to apply yourself and go above and beyond, like do it for something that really counts or really matters to you.
Yeah, no, man, that's so good. And you talk about, like career advancement and, helping people with career and stuff. I think one of the best ways to do that is to become a problem solver for, your employer or the people, your clients, whoever, because it's almost like when people see you as a problem solver, there's a difference in being a problem solver and a problem presenter. Like
Yes.
I try to encourage people, like, don't just go to the person and say, hey, we have a problem. Propose a solution, because if so, you're going to be the person who solves those problems, because these people who lead, whether it's the company, the teams, or whatever, that's all they do is solve problems. So if you can help with that, you're going to be seen as a person who maybe will be considered for that promotion or whatever it happens to be. Yeah, so I think and it's also too, just how do you want to do a thing, because as we know, how you do anything is how you do everything. So it's like,
Exactly.
go above and beyond. um yeah, just such a good lesson there. But I know you got to get going, you got to get out. Yeah, it's been great. Been great talking to you. And like I said, I do appreciate your patience. If you can hang out for just a second, I'll explain to you about the upload. But it's been nice talking with you today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cody. I appreciate the chance to be on your podcast and share some insights. And thank you for a wonderful conversation.
For sure. Thanks. Hey guys, I appreciate everybody tuning in today. If you enjoyed this podcast or enjoyed this episode, you can find more at Pure Wisdom Podcast. This is on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Rumble, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple and Google Podcasts. There you can subscribe, like, and share and interact with all of our content. Again, we appreciate it, and we will see you next time. This episode is brought to you by Excel Coaching Academy. Hey guys, I'm really excited to let you know that I started a mindset coaching business. So what I want to do with this business is I want to help entrepreneurs, business owners, salespeople, leaders, and fitness enthusiasts or athletes develop the right mindset to increase revenue, improve business or performance, and overcome the challenges needed to become the best version of themselves. You can get more information about this by emailing info@excelcoaching.academy.